Hi
Right.
everyone. Welcome to this event by Champaca Books with the author Usha K R. She's going to be talking about her latest book, Boys from Good Families. I'll just introduce you to the author and the moderator. Usha K R is the author of the novels Sojourn, The Chosen, A Girl in a River, Monkey Man, and Boys from Good Families, which is her latest book, published by Speaking Tiger. Her novels have been listed for several awards, including the Commonwealth Writers Prize, the Man Asia, and the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature. In conversation with her is Keerti Ramachandra, the translator and editor. She has an MA in English Literature from Karnataka University and an MPhil in Linguistics from JNU. She has varied teaching experience from remedial English to spoken conversational English, English as foreign language for non-Indians, graduate classes in literature and communication skills, and high school courses. She frequently translates from all three languages, Marathi, Kannada, and Hindi, into English, and has received the A.K. Ramanujan Award for Translation in 1995. I'm from Champaca. Champaca Books is an independent women-run bookstore, children's library, and cafe. We bring diverse stories and perspectives for our readers and in our children's library through our events and our books. We have a small cafe for our community to spend a few quiet hours with a book and a cup of coffee. We also have an online store that ships across India where you can get your copy of Boys from Good Families. And now over to you, Usha and Keerti, who will be talking about this book. Keerti, I think you're muted currently.
Yeah. Thank you, Nirika. Good evening, everybody. Hello, Usha. Nice to see you here and to be in conversation with you. I still remember the story that I read written by Usha way back in 1995, an award-winning short story called Sepia Tones, and I haven't been able to forget it. So Usha's writing has always been very special for me, and it's an honor to be in conversation with her today. I think Nirika has introduced Usha as a writer of 4 books. Let's get to know Usha a little more, because it's always interesting to see how a writer's journey has progressed and where she started from. So my first question, Usha, would be to ask whether you have a literary background. I mean, do you come from a family that was very literary, that was writing, etc.?
Hi, Keerti. It's great to be here. Thank you, Champaca Books, and you, Keerti. And I look forward to stimulating conversation about things literary. You asked me about my background, whether it's a literary background. Well, it was a reading background. Everybody in my family read a lot. My grandmother was a voracious reader and she was a strong influence on me. She had a vast library and we were urged to read. And you see, reading was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Reading, I would say, was the main source of entertainment, also of exploring the world, of forming your sense of self. So, I mean, these were the pre-internet, pre-social media, even pre-television days. So we formed ourselves through books. We found ourselves through books, and it is this, the curiosity that reading aroused, and this love of other worlds, or the opportunity to explore the lives of others, that led to writing eventually. The connect between reading and writing, because what you found was you could branch out and reach so many different worlds and the lives of people who were so unlike you. So that is where my interest in writing began. And of course, we have a very strong oral tradition. We have stories from our mythology. And when my formal reading were, I would say some of my favorite writers were Jane Austen, Henry James, Chekhov, and E.M. Foster. But I must say that my spur to writing was when I read Shashi Deshpande's That Long Silence. And I said, here is a very Indian ethos that is expressed in English. And that was the spur to my novel writing. I want to read a quote from George Eliot here, who says that art is the nearest thing to life. It is a mode of amplifying experience and extending our contact to our fellow men beyond the bounds of our personal lot. So it is a way of reaching out. It is a way through which I found I could explore my world and build characters who made sense to me, who spoke to me, and through them I could speak to others.
That's interesting, because my next question to you was going to be, do you view yourself as primarily a storyteller, or are you a very private writer who is in conversation with characters and with what's happening, creating, we're living in that world of your novel or short story? Or are you a storyteller in the traditional sense of where you have an audience in mind and you're just talking to the people, the readers, the listeners? Your style of storytelling, would it be influenced by that oral tradition you referred to?
I would say that if you're talking about the act of writing, whether it's a short story or a novel, and yeah, before we go further, I must get back to the point you made, Keerti. You and I go back such a long way. It was my short story, Sepia Tones, that won the Katha Award so many years ago in 1995, which you were a part of. And that was the first instance of validation for me as a writer, and it gave me the confidence to explore myself as a writer, other themes, and to go on to my first novel, which came out in 1998. So to come back to your question, when you think of the act of writing, the act of creating, so to say, I would say that if you could divide it, you would say that there are two parts to it. One is that the moment you recognize that you have a character or an idea or an event that sparks off your interest. So there is this inarticulate rush in your head, and there are formless thoughts, and those have to be translated to paper. So that involves a process. The process of inspiration may be chaotic. There's all kinds of things happening, but Virginia Woolf says that a letter that she wants to write, and in this case, maybe a story or a novel, is like a film of wax pressed to your heart. So the thing is to translate your thoughts into words on paper. And that is a process. And there I would say that your ideas, the characters, the story that you have in mind goes through the prism of your mind. And there is a certain form that it takes so that it becomes a readable object. It makes sense and it is not something just chaotic. Because you cannot really separate form and content. The oral form is very different from the written form. There is a certain formality, and the two cannot really be, separated. It is like needle and thread. That's what Henry James says, that content and form are like needle and thread. You can't have one without the other. So that is how I would, I see myself as a storyteller, where the act of inspiration is spontaneous, and you must convey this spontaneity through a formal process. That is the process of writing.
Okay, this is a little different, and the reason why I asked you this question was primarily because as a translator, I find most of the writers from the regional languages are influenced by the oral tradition in the manner in which they write. But that's got nothing to do with our discussion today. That's for another time.
Yes.
But let's come back to what you were talking just now about how the inspiration, an event, an incident, a scene, a word, an idea comes to your mind. So I believe you are also a film buff. Do you see your stories as scenes? Do you hear your characters speak first, or do you see them first?
Um, it depends on the way the story suggests itself. Some stories may suggest themselves through characters, um, or through ideas or through an event. But finally, all of it has to coalesce in your mind, and it is kind of filtered through your worldview, the way you see things, and then you project it as a short story or a novel. Uh, for instance, in my novel, like Monkey Man, the one before Boys from Good Families, what came first was this image of this strange beast. I don't know if you remember, but in the early millennium, there were newspaper reports from all over India about this strange half man, half beast who was spotted everywhere and who would attack at night unwary people in crowded localities and other places. So this was the image which made me wonder, could it be, what could this creature be? If it is spotted in a city, could it be some kind of a symbol of, a kind of wish fulfillment of a city that is caught up in transformation, where things are happening very too fast for the characters and for the city to deal with, to grapple with. And from there came the story of the four characters who are Bangaloreans and who are dealing with the change that is brought about by particularly the IT revolution in the city. But my latest one, Boys from Good Families, definitely was inspired by the character of Ashwath, the protagonist, and his contradictions, by the many gray spaces in his makeup and the muddle that he is in. So from there began his story, his journey from Bangalore in the 80s to the US in the 80s and the 90s and back to Bangalore again. And the background is the many changes that have taken place in our country, in the world, and of course, in the city.
So, when you think of yourself as a writer, when you look back, do you see your journey from Sojourn, your first novel, to the present book we are discussing, Boys from Good Families? Do you see that a kind of a growth, both in the manner of writing, the maturity, the worldview changing? Do you see that happening in this book? Or can you trace that journey? Is it important too for you?
Well, yes. In certain ways, I find that the concerns that I have are, there is the concerns have remained similar in that I'm interested in how my characters deal with the world. How do they make sense of the world, so to say? We are all born with a certain capital, a certain cachet, and of our own personalities, where we are situated, of family, of community, and even our class, our economic level, what we have at our disposal. And then comes a time when individuals or my characters they confront the world. Either, they go out into the world, there is a change in circumstances, which leads to a change in their mental makeup, in the way they think. So this friction, this tussle, how they get out and make sense of the world, how they evolve as humans, that is something that has remained interesting. But what I find is, with my novels, I find that I'm now more ready to take risks. Risks in the form of opening out the footprint of the novel and dealing with characters who are maybe outside your comfort zone, and also dealing with characters who are not with the getting into the gray, so to say. For instance, in Boys from Good Families, which is has kind where I can see that evolution, I found that I was dealing with a character who was very tentative in his motivations, in the way he acts. So there were no definitive facets to his character. And his journey also is, it's not as if he's a hero and he sets out and he conquers worlds and he comes back victorious. That gives you a certain momentum. You're able to chisel your characters and your events very, very finely and very forcefully. But I found that I was ready now to deal with a character who was tentative in his motivation and in his journey through the world, in the journey that he makes. See, another thing is writers also feel the need to up the ante. You get very bored if you keep writing about the same old thing. And the world around you is changing. Writers are responsive to the world around them. So you find that your horizons shift, or they may widen. And the way you think, the way you perceive your characters, that may change. So you have to be open to that. And that is what I think has happened in my journey as a writer.
So would you define Ashwath as a sort of anti-hero then? And if you don't think so, would you like to introduce us to him by reading something about him from the book?
Yeah, I'll do that. Before that, I'll just summarize the story a little bit. I mean, Boys from Good Families. The protagonist is called Ashwath, and it begins in the 1980s. The span of the book is about 1980 to 2005 or 2007, so about 25 years. And he belongs to a very comfortable upper class family in Bangalore, a landed family. And he is very complacent about his background. And then he falls in love with the girl who lives in the outhouse. And the way in which his family reacts, they cannot even countenance the idea. It kind of wakes him up. He realizes how dependent he is on his family for his well-being. For the first time, he has stepped out of, by falling in love with this girl, he has stepped out of his comfort zone, the conventions, the morality with which he has been brought up. And he realizes that if he really has to be free, if he has to explore his life, that is, examine his life, he has to break free of his family. So he leaves. He goes to the US, which of course is, the beacon of freedom for all people, particularly that generation, even now. And he has certain experiences there. He experiences freedom in all its variety, in all its facets. 25 years later, he comes back to Bangalore because he inherits the grand old house. And what he had thought of as a nuisance, a white elephant, he comes back and finds that it's a very valuable piece of real estate. And that sets off other ripples in the story. So he comes back, he completes his journey, and that is the background. So the reason he leaves is because he meets a relative of his who is in the US and who seems to embody everything that Ashwath is aspiring for. So I'll just read this bit. His contemporary, the relative who comes and visits him, is called Manohar. Manohar had flooded the room with the lemony sense of aftershave lotion, which remained long after he had left, and which Ashwath would associate with a sense of resolve, of clean and fresh beginnings. He seemed like a man who had forged ahead and taken charge of his destiny. That day, Ashwath had become aware that he had not traveled much. In his 23 years, he had gone only as far as Madras and once on a college trip to Delhi. And now he was convinced that his life was closed, confined, and that he lived in a small, mean place. The first stirrings had grown into a perverse desire to oppose his father, to break away, to turn his back against all that was familiar and which had tied him down. Over the past year, he had come to realize that he couldn't continue in the gilded cage, weighed down by the family name, smothered by their concern. He would be ground down by the long established routine, like his father. If he had dosa for breakfast instead of idli, his taste buds would rebel. He would demand coffee at the right temperature and on the dot and make a virtue of it. He would wear a long coat and loose trousers and a cap on his head, 60 years already, and go to a nameless government office every day. He would marry the girl of his parents' choice, and the whole family, his parents included, would go to a temple after the wedding or to visit relatives. Maybe his wife and he would have one solo trip to Brindavan Gardens together before the children descended. A boy to bring fame, Keerti, to the family, and a girl who would ensure a lifetime of aarti, celebrations, festive occasions. And the chain would continue forever and ever. Every thought, every feeling would be as per prior sanction. A life filled with sameness, platitudes. Of what use was salvation if you had to follow the straight and narrow road to it? So this is the stimulus for Ashwath to leave his home. And what interested me in this when I began writing this book was this whole concept of freedom. You know, what makes for dissatisfaction? Why do people want to leave their homes? Of course, other than political turmoil or the fact that economically you need to seek your fortune. So, and again, what is freedom? What are the notions of success? How do people value themselves? How do they view themselves? And how does the world view people who are successful and who make a life for themselves? So this is the kind of background to boys from good families.
So would you agree with me if I said that Ashwath epitomizes the young people who grew up in the 80s, who, you know, were boys from good families and who did feel oppressed by their parents because they were beginning to feel the changes that were happening, the opportunities that were opening up to them, and yet most of us, and I can vouch for it because I'm slightly from another generation, but that, you know, the parents still expected the son to follow the father's profession, to live in a joint family, whose wife was expected to take care of the parents, and how at that point around the 80s, boys started, well, not rebelling, but at least making an effort to change or get out of this stranglehold. Is that what you, have I got it right? Is that
Yes.
what you meant?
Yes, absolutely. That is quite right, Keerti. You've got that part of the novel and of Ashwath's journey right.
Yeah. All right. Now, interestingly, this whole story is about Ashwath and how he wanted to get out. He wanted to shirk up or shed his responsibility, make a life for himself. But then he has this sister called Savitri. And
Yes.
Savitri is a young woman who has always played second fiddle or taken second place, has no, after Ashwath, she's never been in the forefront or she's never come first to anybody at any time. Now, when Ashwath chooses to get up and go, the responsibility that he was shouldering or expected to shoulder is taken on by her. And I think that she is a very strong and a very, a strong woman. And or is she one of those submissive girls who just thinks that, well, this is my lot, I have to accept it. Whereas boys can ask questions, why me? Why should I take it on? Girls of those days, and not much has changed even today, take on the responsibilities that they are burdened with and do it without asking any questions. So how do you view Savitri?
Yes, I'm glad you brought up Savitri because I invested a lot in Savitri, who was Ashwath's sister. In fact, the title, Boys from Good Families, I was hoping by default that the question would arise, what about girls from good families? What about them? So I invested a lot of time. I spent a lot of time on Savitri, on building her character. I've given her interesting locations in which she plays out. And I thought a lot about her compulsions and the choices she makes. She is definitely a very strong character. And the thing is, she did not, even though she's the livelier, the more intuitive, and possibly the more adventurous, and maybe the more intelligent of the two, she is not given the options that Ashwath is given, and she doesn't even expect them. As you said, she shoulders those responsibilities without giving it a second thought, as if it's a skin that she grows into. And this is one aspect of the book and of the novel, that she's as interesting or as important a character as Ashwath. And finally, in the denouement, you have a confrontation between the two. And it also tells you a lot about families and about relationships. And all said and done, they are brother and sister, and they have a certain background. And irrespective of the way in which they have traveled in the world, their paths have diverged. But when they come back, there is the past that they have to reckon with and they have to talk about. And at the same time, because they are siblings, you know that they will rest finally with each other. Whether it is, their levels of comfort may differ, but finally they do come home together. They have to home together with each other. So I'll read a passage about Savitri when they are young. Savitri is part of what was the National Cadet Corps. It's still there, but at one time for girls who liked the outdoors and who were adventurous and who wanted to explore the world, in college and in the National Cadet Corps was an opportunity.
It was also an opportunity to wear trousers, because when
yes, absolutely, yes,
you wore a uniform, and
yes,
that was greatly liberating for that generation, I'm sure.
Yes, it was.
Otherwise, you'd be in a davani and a long skirt or
yes,
a half sari.
or a sari even. Yes, that's right. So in this scene that I'm reading, she has just come home from National Cadet Corps or an MCC practice, and her brother is waiting for her. She came bounding up the stairs, and as soon as she saw him, she cocked her right hand at him and fired again. Pushwaw, pushwaw. She was wearing khaki trousers and a khaki shirt and a cap on her head, with a red feather sticking out, her National Cadet Corps uniform, which he knew she loved. Today we had rifle shooting. I had an almost perfect score, better than anybody else, even the boys. The paragliding trials are coming up after that. If I do well, I'll be selected for the Republic Day camp in Delhi. Look, she was cradling a small shiny object in her palm, a narrow brass cylinder about 2 centimeters tall, a spent cartridge case. We weren't supposed to, but I picked it up. Savitri, he said, you had better get out of those clothes and those heavy boots and forget about paragliding and Delhi. You know they'll never let you. Their mother disapproved of Savitri wearing what she called men's clothes and did not share his sister's enthusiasm for the NCC. We'll see, Savitri was not to be repressed so easily. I'm not like you, scaredy poo, afraid of Amma, trembling in front of Appa. Okay, calm down. Here, look what I've got for us. She pulled out a large paper cone. He caught the reek of onion and hot oil. Savitri, come on, hurry. They ate quickly in large, ungainly handfuls. The bhel puri from the roadside vendor was terribly spicy, but it tasted good. their mother had forbidden them from eating it. So this is Savitri for you. And of course, as you said, she, in a way, she ends up paying the price for the choices that her brother makes.
And the trajectory of her life is also rather uneven, right?
Yes.
And because of that, she finds herself not so much a victim, but also helpless in some of the situations she's in. And she deals with them, unlike Ashwath, who seems to me to be running away all the time, both
Yes.
from his surroundings and himself.
Yes.
Usha, I just wanted to ask you, Ashwath's relationships with the women in his life are very interesting. Would you like
Yes.
to talk a little bit about that? All the women that he encounters, starting with his mother.
Yes. See, as far as his mother and sister are concerned, like many men of that generation, or many people, and even now, he takes them for granted. I don't think he gives them a second thought. Of course, he loves them, but he doesn't really think of them as, say, individuals. They are mother and sister. And he and his sister are very close. And his sister's disaffection or her reaction to the girl in the outhouse, it helps him make up his mind. But when I think of Ashwath, he is, E.M. Foster used a certain phrase for his characters. He said they are men with undeveloped hearts. So that is, I would say that is Ashwath's, that is what Ashwath suffers from. That is people who live by convention, who live by accepted mores, people who belong to a certain social class, who are born to privilege, who are born to comfortable circumstances. They are so used to it that their hearts are undeveloped. When they are confronted by a situation which is out of their comfort zone, they really do not react to it wholeheartedly. They are hamstrung. So as a result of which they just muddle through. And, for instance, if, D.H. Lawrence has a volume of poems, I think it's called Look, We've Come Through, and there's an exclamation mark. If I were to talk about Ashwath, and title this book differently, I would say, look, we have muddled through, because that is what the characters do. And this connects again with what I wanted to do with this book. He is a person who rolls through life. He is hamstrung, and he is not a very intelligent reader of the signs, and he doesn't have the equipment to deal with it. So life is difficult for him. And while, experience always doesn't make you richer, that is what this book says. Finally, you may be not hamstrung, but you may be injured by your experiences. And you get back into a level of comfort where you can say, yes, this is it. I'm going to live my life at this pitch, at this register. So that too is a kind of life. The way in which he behaves in other circumstances with other people, it extends also to the women in his life. See, another thing is the US is for him a beacon of freedom. And he feels that, you get the impression that he feels once we go there, it is uncharted territory. He may have wanted to begin his life anew with a clean slate, but he is going to a place which has its own history, it has its own geography. It's a very cold place that he finds very difficult to deal with. And it has its own modes. People behave in a certain way. And economically also, it has its own dynamics. So that is something which he finds a challenge. And initially he's successful over there in his life. And finally, but the tide turns. When the economy is overtaken by a depression, he finds himself out of a job, and he has to deal with it. The kind of the security that he enjoyed in his life in India and had given him a sense of complacence, and he finds that he is not quite ready to explore all the dimensions of freedom. Keerti, I want to read a bit here about his going to the
in the US.
US.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was about to ask you to do that, please.
Yeah. He had come of age in Reagan's America. If the claim on a country and its first citizen was too grandiose, he would say in more famous words, he had been a contender. For 10 years, he had been given brownie points by Reagan's America, and he had faithfully cashed all of them at the bank. He had played the game by the rules, pursued the American dream, and acquired the 3 C's of success: a credit card, a condo, and a car, and a fourth, a corporate job. He had made his somber way in the city, freestyle, teaching himself, trying to disavow both character and fate. For these were old burdens, burdens he had come here to shed. Another writer had said that the city had 2 faces, one for the good boy and one for the bad boy. What about the in-betweens, he wanted to know, or the thwarted, the meek and the clueless, of whom the detective novels said sooner or later, and then his luck ran out. So this is the conundrum he faces in America.
Which makes me wonder whether, this ingrained morality, value system of a conservative, orthodox, let's say, traditional family is very difficult to shed no matter what your environment is, because even when you are given an opportunity to break out of it, you don't know how to deal with it.
Yes.
And I don't know that very much has changed for a lot of people.
Right.
So this is really something which I really was curious about, because he cannot form a lasting relationship with anyone. Is that a personality flaw, or is it the circumstances in which he finds himself?
I would say that it is both. First, his personality. He comes from, he is a smug individual, I would say, and unthinking of the privileges that he has. Like many of us, we don't really question the advantages and the privileges that we have. And when that is challenged, when his feeling of smugness, of self-satisfaction is challenged, when there's a stirring in his heart, the dark visceral matter, as you say, he finds that his responses are not adequate. And when he goes to the US, he cannot summon up the courage, or maybe he just doesn't have the spine to explore it in all its offerings. And because it requires us, you need to completely shed your past in order to embrace the new. And he is not ready for that. And circumstances also don't allow it. Because to be fair, the period between 1980 to 2005, you find that the world has changed. That is when the world, not just in India, the world too, underwent so many changes. Globalization became a reality. And in India, you find the old sinecure of government jobs. They got over. You had privatization that came in, and which completely changed the tenor of people's lives, their social lives, their jobs. And at the same time, you had the revolution in communication. You had cable TV, the internet, email. You could write to anybody, you could see anybody anywhere in the world. So the old days of the aerogram, the trunk call, all that was redundant. So this sets up a spin of changes, and both Ashwath and Savitri have to deal with it. So my novel references many things. You know, cable TV, you had American soaps coming in. At the same time, you had wars being relayed on television before you just read mediated accounts of it in the newspaper. But in this particular novel, in this novel, you have Operation, the Gulf War comes, right, and it is relayed on their televisions. The Berlin Wall coming down, that too is what they see. And the assassination of a prime minister, you have Rajiv Gandhi, that too is an event which comes in. And this sends up such a tumult. In India, for instance, the whole this privatization, the changes that were brought in, the economic changes, it set up a kind of adventurism. People were ready to explore all the opportunities that it provided. And Savitri's husband gets caught in an infamous stockbroking scam of the 90s. And on the other side of the world, her brother also becomes victim to an economic downturn. He finds that his savings are washed away because of a scam that overcomes the bank in which he has placed all his savings. So in a sense, we do live in a globalized world. So just as communication and travel have become easy, so also have misfortunes. Countries paying the price for each other's transgressions, so to say. So he has the flaws, you would say, of his character or his personality, the way his personality is, the way he is as a person, and circumstances, both conspire to take his life on a certain trajectory. And when he comes back after 25 years to claim his inheritance, he finds the city so changed. And that I have tried to portray through the characters of his niece and his nephew. If in the 80s he had challenged the existing order in a certain way, he finds his niece and nephew challenging the present order in their own ways. His niece lives in the moment. She doesn't really care about too many things. His nephew is an idealistic young man. He gives up his engineering college to join the theater. And in his choice of friends and the way he lives, he is more inclusive as we find the city and lives becoming. I just want to read a bit here about his interactions with his niece, if there's time.
Yes, I think we can spend a couple of minutes.
Okay. So he has, this is his niece, Shweta, who is a young college-going girl, and she lives by her own rules. She lives by the moment, and her uncle, when he comes back, when Ashwath comes back, he's puzzled by her and her brother, and he also gets very fond of them, even while not being able to understand them completely. So here is his interaction with his niece. It was dark by the time he got home. His niece was waiting for him. Buns from the bakery, she hailed him. That's all for dinner tonight. And curd rice. Her eyes were bright with suggestion. Yes. Shall we go to McDonald's? That was it. That was all. When he had first arrived, he noticed that the house at the end of their street, where the Shafiuddins used to live, and who had lived there as long as he could remember, had been torn down, and a new building was coming up. Our very first McDonald's, right down the road. His niece had been excited beyond measure. There's a clown sitting on the seat in front of the shop. I thought he was real the first day I saw him. I'm sure you go to McDonald's there ever so often. You're lucky. You must tell us if the burgers taste the same. They are supposed to, anywhere in the world. He told her quite truthfully that he had gone to McDonald's every day for 3 months. The job in the kitchen, washing dishes, disguised as hygiene assistant, had come handy and fitted neatly just before his last stint of the day at the bookshop. So McDonald's it was, the decor and the menu looking the same as everywhere else. I saw you in the market today, he began. I'm loving it. She closed her eyes and bit into the macalu and heaved at the straw of her milkshake. A small mountain of soft dessert sat in a tub next to her milkshake. He was drinking coffee. That was Jimmy, she said, her eyes still closed to negotiate the size of the burger. Chandan Bala's BF. Chandan Bala's BF? Boyfriend, Ash Mama. He recalled the single rose that Shweta had been holding on Valentine's Day and her intense, long-lasting phone conversation on the terrace that evening. And you, he wanted to ask her, do you have a BF? Ash Mama, I'll ask you a riddle. Let's see if you know the answer. Chandan Bala and her BF were forgotten, tossed out of her mind. Two boys go to a temple. One sees the other light a cigarette with the temple lamp. He is so shocked that he faints? No. Slaps his friend? No. Last guess. Bursts into tears? No. Drops his beer bottle. You should see your face, Ash Mama. She was laughing so hard that she spluttered bubbles of milkshake. Leaf, lotus, pearl, umbrella, he challenged her. Of course, Ash Mama, it's such an old one. It was an old one, a multilingual pun, facile, a schoolboy's joke. It was a literal translation of, hey Kamala, give me a kiss. She was eating the dessert now, shaking her head at him and smiling, a smile almost maternal in its tenderness. Oh, Ash Mama, she said, you really don't know anything, do you? So that's his niece.
That is so typical, isn't it? The
Yes.
affection, the exasperation. Oh, Ash Mama, you don't know anything. How many times have we heard the younger generation talking to us like that? Or not because they want to be rude, but they just think that we don't really know. And
we are out of it. I mean,
yes,
she thinks he's out of it.
Yes. And Usha, but now with all these changes that were happening and Ashwath coming back and finding himself a misfit, both in the US where he couldn't live the American dream that he thought it was going to be, comes back to India and finds himself totally bewildered by the circumstances, by the situation that he is in. Are you trying to suggest here, and is that the message of your book, that the old order has changed, but we haven't found a new one yet to replace it? Is that the message of your of the novel?
Yes, one of the themes is that as you live through change, it is as change takes place very rapidly, as things that one is familiar with, this city, your family, your job, even the society you live in, when it changes, and the replacements are very difficult to come to terms with. First of all, are there replacements? Are we all grappling with crutches to support us when we find that our traditional props, that of community, family, even your education, it doesn't hold anymore? Like, for instance, the pandemic that we are living through, we have to kind of improvise as we go along. So similarly, even in the book, of course, it doesn't have anything to do with the pandemic, but when things have changed so much, they find that whatever they had lived by, all the truths that you have lived by, they don't hold good anymore. So what do you then look to? What do you then you have to make some kind of concoction as you go along. Something remembered, something that you've received, and something that your intuition tells you to embrace.
So that depends again on the kind of personality you have. But
yes,
there are people like Tippy who perhaps take advantage of the situation and become God women. And she becomes a spiritual leader. And there are so many of them mushrooming all over the place. Is that because we're looking for that crutch, as you said, or an anchor somewhere where we can put our faith? The problems of the present times?
Yes, there's another angle in the novel, and that is this girl in the outhouse. Finally, she becomes a kind of a god woman, and this again extends to the kind of, and the family that had disdained her, the girl Savitri, becomes her devotee. So a member of the family that had disdained hers finds that they come looking to her for succor. And the thing is, you can't really devalue help when you need it. You never know what you are going to, where you are going to reach out. In a way, Savitri almost reneges on the faith and on the beliefs of her family, because she finds herself helpless and she reaches out to this modern day god woman. As you were saying, this whole aspect of the way uh, uh, God people, so to say, have kind of mushroomed, and they're so much in the news of late, and many of them being toxic. But that was not what I was interested in, because in the newspaper you can read about their doings. The truths there are so much stranger and more interesting and colorful than fiction, I would say. But through the Tipi character, what I was trying to explore is exactly this. What is it? Why do people who, against their good sense or better judgment, why are they driven to certain practices which they may know in their bones are self-destructive or may not be completely safe, or something that they would have done had if they had been confident of their choices. And so definitely this is again a result of the old order crumbling without providing you succor to go forward and to kind of deal with the challenges of your life. Actually, I
find to interrupt, Usha.
Yeah?
There's some questions coming in, if you could take them.
Yeah, sure.
There's one question. Can you see that? So as you wish to answer them, there's a small one in the chat and in the question and answer.
Yes, there is Veena Sheshadri. She says, congratulations on your new book, Usha. What kind of preparation went into Boys from Good Families before you started the actual writing? And what were your concerns when you were crafting the book? Thanks, Veena. I'll just answer that before we come to Hamsa. So your question is, yes, this was a book that was, the kernel of this book was on my mind for a very long time, even when I was working on other books and my other novels. So when I go back to my notes, I find that the earliest details they go back to 2007, when I started thinking about the character and his dilemmas and what he's going to face. And when it comes to researching a book, now you have a lot of aids or tools available to you. You have so many resources. I mean, as it figures in my book as well, the internet has opened out. You have, you can read up so many books. There are the traditional print and journal sources, and then you have multimedia. I consulted several photo blogs, films, university databases. So the kind of resources you can get to shore up and to build up your research are many. But finally, it has to be transfigured by one's imagination. And when I was writing this book, my concerns mainly were that this is a book with a much larger footprint than the earlier one. So how would I build a narrative that would span all the concerns? How would my structure span all the concerns of my novel? Then again, my hero is not a conventional hero. He does not have sharply defined facets, either to his character or to the way forward in his journey. So my concern was, how do I tell the story of a middling man and still retain the interest of the reader? How do I tell the story of a tentative person who steps very gingerly, but I as a writer should not imitate his way of being. I have to be strong. My storytelling has to be strong and sure, even while being nuanced and while suggesting things. So these were my concerns, and this was the way I went about it. Next, Hamsa says, although set around the 90s and 80s, theme still remains relevant. Yes, Hamsa, that is so. My questions are, do you think we have become a generation of escapists unable to face the challenges of life? Of course, by staying afloat in our comfort zones. Second, the sister is usually one who takes most flack from the family and the boys while growing up. And yet the boys struggle through life, unable to choose wisely. What is your opinion on this? So, yes, that one of the themes of this novel is how we are confronted by change, by sudden change in all aspects of our life, and we are unable to deal with it. So I think there is only this much that people can take. Even now, you hear so much of people suffering from depression, of not being able to deal with what life throws at them. So yes, retreat to one's comfort zones and saying that, yes, I'm only going to do things that I'm comfortable with. You know, a piece of advice that is often given to people is, they say that, look, don't have anything to deal with people who are harmful, who are toxic. Just cut them out of your life. So this is kind of very valid and very relevant advice being given to people, that yes, you withdraw into your comfort zone because you have a life to live and you have to be healthy. Mentally, you have to be healthy in order to live your life, to carry your responsibilities, and to see the day through. So yes, that is true. And then again, in this novel, it is a traditional setup where the women are expected to heft the load of family life. And because the men are so coseted, they don't even realize it. And finally, of course, to be fair, the responsibility of running the family, of being the breadwinner, was expected of men when this book is set, and maybe even now, whereas women did not really have to venture there. But which is why their freedom, their options were curtailed, and the kind of support they lent, you know, I keep saying, like Atlas holding the mountain, they were neither seen nor acknowledged. And so that was it. That was how things were. And in many ways, yes, things are. And whether boys struggle through life unable to choose wisely, if all your decisions are taken for you and you don't have any responsibilities, so to say, and you are not accountable, others make, your parents or elders, your community makes your choices for you, and you are not accountable for the outcomes of your life, there is always the cushion either of your family or somebody else who takes the blame for it or who shares in it. Then yes, whether you're a man or a woman, wise choices become elusive. Aparna Prabhu says, the novel is set in old Bangalore and new Bangalore. How did you research on the settings so as to capture the authenticity? Well, Aparna, I must confess that much of it is lived experience. And also, I spoke to a lot of people from, members of my family and friends and the extended community to get to know things, the feel of life. For instance, you know that this was a time when a dosa cost, I think, 12 paisa or something. And this was information given to me by someone from an older generation. And they speak of 8 annas, that is 50 paisa, which is no longer currency. It is no longer valid currency. So it was based on that the research for this book went forward.
Usha, we have about 5 minutes. So if you'd like, there's 2 questions in the chat. If you'd like to answer those, and I think we'd be able to close.
All right. Swati says, are you working on a new story? Is it a conscious decision to have Bangalore as the background? I'm not working on anything as yet, not overtly as yet. Bangalore is, because it is a city that I am familiar with, and you have to have a setting. For me, the setting is important. It affects the characters and it gives them certain dimensions of their personalities. And in a novel like Monkey Man, the city is a very active player in the scenario. So, I think that is it. Anything else? Keerti says, is Ashwath a person you have come across in life? Most of the boys actually are not heroes or ideal sons that parents dream of. I would say he's an amalgamation of people, events, and situations that I have observed either directly or read about, heard about, or got to know through various events. So, Nidhika, are there any more questions that
there aren't any more questions, and so I think we're okay to close. If you have anything to say to finish up.
So thank you all very much. Thank you for being here. And Veena says, this is not a question, but I wanted to let you know that I loved Monkey Man and was so content to read such a well-written book set in Bangalore. Thank you very much, Veena. That is truly gratifying. It's such a happy thought that readers have connected and enjoyed your work. Thank you. I hope all of you will like Boys from Good Families too.
So thank you, Usha and Keerti. That was a delightful conversation. We hope to see you in the store sometime when things ease up, and I hope this passes and everyone's able to come to the store. As you know, the book is available on the website. We've pasted it on chat. I'm just going to do so again. And thank you everyone for attending, and we hope to see you again for our next event.
Thank you, Keerti and Champaca Books and Nidhika, and thank you all who participated.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone, and see you soon.
Good evening and bye.